Today's tutorial is all about how to create a simple product reveal using an animation in KeyShot. I'm going to show you how to animate the camera to take an otherwise fairly stagnant and boring shot and breathe a little bit of life into it. So without further ado, let's dive in. In order to create this product reveal animation, I'm going to use some custom assets that I've already created. This is just going to save us a little bit of time. Now, you can go ahead and grab these for free from my file vault. Just follow the link down below. Once you've downloaded the folder and extracted it, you'll see your assets. I'm going to show you how to import these into KeyShot libraries so that we can quickly drag them into our scene. First off, we're going to start with the material. Inside our materials tab, I'm going to click on the materials folder. And if you don't have a custom folder already for your own materials, we're going to make one. Right click on materials, go to add folder, and just call it custom. From here, you can go ahead and click on the folder with the arrow on it to import our material. Now I'm going to browse to the location of the project files. And you can see the first one, the only one that's available is this KMP. This is this material we want to import. Go ahead and hit open, and it should import right into the custom folder, and we can see the thumbnail for it down here. If we want to change the size of it, you can hover over it, hold Control or Command, and scroll up and down on your wheel. The next thing we want to do is import a environment. So we're going to go to our Environments tab. Same exact process. If you don't have a custom folder already, go ahead and create one. Call it Custom. And we're going to import it using the same button. And it should, if we go to that same location, find the custom environment that I've created. We're going to go ahead and import that as well. The next thing we want to do is go to our Models tab. If you don't have a custom Models folder already, go ahead and right click, add folder, call it Custom, or perhaps you want to put your name, something else. And then we're going to use the import again, and we're going to go to that same file where all of our project files are, and we're going to import that KSP. Go ahead and open. And this is going to be the subject matter of our rendering. And our last project file is a 3D file format called a step file. We're going to drag that right on into KeyShot. And I'm going to take the default import settings, except for I've changed my tessellation quality to 0.3. I'll go ahead and hit import, and we can see that this is the scene that we're going to be working with. Now that green cube, if I select it, we can see in the scene tree that it's the product placeholder and it's 10 by 10 inches large. It's quite a bit bigger than this desktop timer we're going to be rendering. So we're going to have to be resizing some stuff. The next thing I want to do is jump into GPU mode. This is going to keep my computer quieter for recording, and it's going to give me a little bit faster render results. The next thing I want to do is hide that product placeholder and drag the timer right on into roughly the same position. And I'll just hit OK. And if we zoom on in, we can see we have our product in there. Of course, the rest of our set is quite too large, so we're going to change the size of it. We're going to go into our model set and grab everything within here, the glass, the room, and the backdrop, and I'm holding Control to select all those. And I'll hit Control D as in Delta to bring up the Move tool. Now, with the updates to KeyShot 2025.3, we have a new gizmo, which is pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and just hit S to go into scale mode. And if I hover over one of these cubes and hold Shift, I can uniformly scale this entire set down. We need it quite a bit smaller, and I'm going to click on Snap to Ground to bring this down to the ground. To position it, I'll hit the T key, which goes into translate mode, and I'm just going to use this to position it roughly where I want, and I'll hit OK. Now to get a little bit closer, I'll zoom on in, and we can see a few things are out of place. I'm going to click on the backdrop and hit Control D to bring up the Move tool. I'll lift it up and then hit Snap to Lower Object, which will place it right on the ground within our room. And I'm going to do the same thing for our piece of glass. Just bring it up and hit Snap to Lower Object. And of course, our desktop timer is also floating. So in the scene tree, I'm going to click on that and I'll hit Control D and I'll hit Snap to Lower Object. I'm excited to share with you the KeyShot Animation Masterclass. This course will guide you through my proven method of creating professional quality product animation videos. From research and inspiration to planning and execution to post-production, delivery, and archiving, I've covered the entire process beginning to end. With a runtime of about 20 hours, it's the most comprehensive course you're going to find on product animation. To see a full breakdown of chapters, lessons, project files, and more, follow the link below. There we go. So our scene should be pretty well set up, but our camera's not pivoting around the timer, which is really annoying. Let's go to our camera. Let's create a new camera. And under our target and pivot, we're going to click on this box called Use Target as Pivot. And we're going to click on this icon to set the camera target. And I want to go into not point mode, but model mode. And I will go ahead and click on the center of our timer. And this should now mean that our camera is rotating around our target, which is pretty cool. Before we move on, let's go ahead and save our camera's position. The next thing I want to do is address this dark glass on the front of our timer. It's not actually dark, it's just that the light's not passing through it, and we can fix this by going into our lighting tab and jumping into product mode. This will enable enough ray bounces for the light to pass through that layer of material. Next, let's address our materials on our backdrop. If you remember, we imported some custom materials, well, one of them, and it's this one here in our custom folder. This is something I like to use to create like a worn painted material. So I'm going to drag this right onto the backdrop as well as the room that we're in. Okay, let's take a look at this wall and turn it into a cool piece of fluted glass. Double click on it, and we're going to go to our material type, which is diffuse, and change it to dielectric. This is a fancy glass material. Has a few more options than our basic glass. The next thing we want to do is add a texture to create that ribbed or fluted effect. So we're going to go to our textures, into the bump maps, and then normal maps, and grab this horizontal normal map texture and just drag it right on here. We want to put it in our bump channel. Now it's going the wrong way. It's horizontal. We want it vertical. So in the properties of the texture on the right-hand side, we're going to go and change the angle UV to 90, which is going to rotate the texture around its center. Now, of course, it's way too big. So we're going to go to our scene units, and we're just going to scale this down until it starts looking better. I'm going to go to something like 30, and I think that looks pretty good. Now, it's a little bit aggressive, so we're going to go into our bump settings under our texture and change this to something like 0.1, which should be much more realistic. Now, if we want this glass to look a little bit better too, we can add a little bit of color. So if we go to our properties for this material, we can change the transmission from white to either a light green or a light blue, which both tend to mimic the real glass that we see in the real world. I'm going to go for a bluish color, and I like to go with a saturation of just like 1, 2, or 3% and keep the value from going to pure white. This looks pretty good. And then a transparency distance will strengthen the effect. So now we have a tinted blue glass. And when we look at it from the edge, it gets really dark, which is exactly what happens in the real world. This is a little bit exaggerated. I'm going to increase the transparency distance to 5 to make the glass more transparent, but still retain that dark edge for some realism. Also, this doesn't have rounded edges on it, so maybe in my scene tab, I want to go underneath the scene tree, find the rounded edges, and set this to like 0.1. That should just help those edges pick up some highlights as well. So our glass is looking pretty good. It obscures what's behind it for the most part, but then we get the reveal when the camera comes around. I think we can do a little bit more with this material though. Something I really like is that we can add some roughness both inside the material as well as on the surface of the material, which will help to obscure what's behind it even more. So under roughness transmission, this is the cloudiness or the roughness or the scattering of light inside the material. Also use a small value like 0.05. And then for the roughness on the surface, if we want the surface to also be rough, like it's been sandblasted, we could use a small value like 0.05 as well. Unfortunately, this darkens the material a little bit, but we have a multiple surface scattering checkbox. And when we turn this on, it should lighten that up a little bit, making it a little bit more realistic. Now, I like the glossy reflections on the surface of the glass, so I'm going to take this down to 0 again and just retain the roughness inside the material. And we could dial this back to something even smaller if we want, so it's more subtle. I think something in between would look good, maybe 0.25, 0.03. There we go. I'm digging that. So it's up to you to customize how you want this glass to look, but we're going to move on to something else. Now this backdrop is nice, but I also want the room that it's in to have a bit of differentiation. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on it and just darken its diffuse color a little bit. So we'll bring it down from 80 to maybe 70. And it looks like it changed our backdrop too. I don't want that, so they must be linked. So I'm going to right click material, unlink material, double click on it to edit it, bring that diffuse back up to something like 80. I think that looks good. Now we have better distinction between the background and this backdrop. And that should do it for our materials. So the current lighting in our scene is pretty flat, and I think we can improve on that if we use the environment that I gave you. So let's go to that environment library into our custom folder, and then let's go into the environment tab in the project panel. We're going to take that environment that we imported and drag it right on into our environment list. And you should see that we get a little bit darker. This environment has brighter highlights and darker shadows, and we can rotate it if we want by holding the Control key and left click and dragging. Now, I think it's actually in a pretty good position. I wanted it to create this kind of triangle shadow behind our product, which will give it a little bit of contrast. Now, the next thing we need to do that is similar to lighting, but not exactly the same, is go into our image styles. This is where we really bring this to life. I'm going to go ahead and create a new image style and jump into photographic mode. This is going to allow us to do some sort of advanced stuff, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple. We're going to jump into ACEs for our image transform, which is going to really flatten the image. This is basically preventing our highlights from getting too bright. And what we want to do is play with these tone mapping controls to breathe life back into this image. So I'm going to go ahead and take my exposure up until it looks good, and it's going to make the image quite a bit brighter. Now, I'm going to go somewhere around 0.75, and we need to do the same thing for the contrast. I'm going to bring this up, and I'm going to go again, maybe 0.5, something like that. So now our darks are darker and our lights are lighter, but we are avoiding overexposing our bright specular highlights, which is what would happen if we were in the default image style usually. The next thing I want to do is jump on into the color tab and just add a little bit more color, 0.1 for saturation, 0.1 for vibrance. This usually just helps to offset the desaturation that happens when you're in something like the ACES image transform. And then lastly, if you're dealing with a bunch of noise, we can jump into the denoise option. And I like to put this pretty low, something like 0.25. And I'm going to bring the Firefly up to something like 0.1. This is just going to help to ensure that we have a nice smooth image without looking overly smooth and losing detail in our textures. And the moment we've all been waiting for, it is time to create our animation. The way we're going to do this is we're going to start by setting up our camera in the starting position that we want. So the whole point of this is to obscure our product behind the glass and then reveal it as we rotate around. So starting somewhere around here, I want the product to be obscured for a little while before it's revealed, and this is going to create a little bit of intrigue. So I'm going to go ahead into my camera tab and just save this current position. Now, if your camera isn't rotating around the subject as we want it to, remember we can always go back and click this button to set our camera target, and you want to make sure it is set on the middle of the product. So back here in camera 1, I now need to create an animation. So I'm going to right click on camera 1 and go down to animation. And we're going to use something pretty simple, which is going to be something called an orbit. As soon as I click on that, we get our animation timeline down below, and you'll see there's a couple of animations in here already. Now these animations are actually having to do with this timer here. At one point, it looks like I had created an animation with these turning. We don't need this to happen. So we're going to take this second rotation and we're just going to move this way down the line so it's out of the way. We don't want to delete it, but we're just going to put this out of the way. And it looks like here we had this first animation where the whole thing moved into position. So what we want to do is grab our starting flag, this time in. We're going to find this little triangle and drag this to the left so it goes right at the end of that first green bar. And then our animation is going to start right at 1 second. So I'll move this blue bar to the beginning of that 1 second mark. And as I rotate around, we can see it's moving. The problem is it's kind of not going where I want it to. And it looks like my camera's position, I messed with it. So I'm going to click off of the camera and go back to it. And now it's back in the position we started at. Now, if I scrub along the timeline, we can see, oops, it's going the wrong way. So to get to those settings, we click on this blue bar and we go into the the properties for that animation. Now, first of all, it's rotating 360 degrees, which is far too many. We're only looking to go maybe something like 75 or I don't know, 80. And we want to go the opposite direction it's going. So we need to put a negative in front of that value. Now when we scrub along this timeline, it should go the right direction and it shouldn't go too far. Now this is definitely still too far, but I can drag my playhead to the end of that blue bar and we can adjust this 80 until we're happy with the final position. So let's bring this down to something like 60 and see what that looks like. Still too much for me. I'm going to go to 40 and that's looking pretty good. I have to decide if I want this highlight in there or not. What happens if I go to like say 30? I think that looks pretty good, but it's not far enough. So I'm going to go to something like maybe 45. And maybe I want to end with this reflection somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to have to bring this down a little bit, maybe 42. That's looking pretty good. And then if I'm concerned about this reflection, there's two things I can do to adjust it. I would either need to make my backdrop a little bit taller, which I could do. That might be the easiest solution. I could also adjust the camera's position. But for now, I'm happy with this animation. If I go ahead and play it back, we can see what it looks like. Nice little reveal. And overall it's good, but it's a little bit boring. I'm gonna use something called motion easing to start slow, speed up, and then slow down. Or perhaps I wanna start at a regular pace and then just slow down as we get toward the end. We do that by clicking on this blue bar, scroll down, go to motion ease, and we can see our different options. And I'm gonna choose ease out, which will start at a constant speed, and it will slow down as we get toward the end, allowing us to really focus on the final result. That looks nice, but again, I want to adjust this reflection. The way I'm gonna do this is go to the scene tab, to the scene tree, and I wanna grab this backdrop, this room, and I'm gonna make it a little bit taller. I'm just gonna zoom out a little bit so I can see what's going on. Control D to grab the move tool, hit S to go into scale mode, and grab that yellow scale button, and I'm just gonna click and drag, and then I'm gonna hit snap to ground, and that's looking pretty good. The only downside is that our backdrop is now sunk into the ground. We'll adjust that in a second. Go ahead and hit OK. Let's just see if we go back to our camera, we're gonna navigate away from it and then back to it. And now that reflection is right where we want it. Now we just have to adjust a couple of other items. Let's grab our backdrop, Control D, T for transform, move it up, snap to lower object. We'll repeat with the other items in the scene. And finally, we want to do that with our timer. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that from the scene tree, which means it's going to capture all of its components. Control D, lift it up, snap to lower object, and hit OK. Now, if we go back to our camera, we just navigate away and back to it, and we're right back to where we were. Now we can see our animation, and I can play it back. Overall, I think that's pretty darn nice. So that's pretty much going to conclude our animation. The other thing we can do, maybe if this is a little bit small in our viewport, is we can adjust our camera's position. This can be a little confusing. What we want to do is put our camera where we need to. Like, let's say we're going to put it right here at the end. I want this to be more prominent in the frame. All we need to do is change, say, the distance of our camera, something like this, and then we make sure we save it. And now if I go back here, we should have just essentially only moved the camera closer, and we end up with the final shot exactly where we want it, and that's pretty good. Now, if you're looking for a little bit of extra credit, I don't love how much of this backdrop is in focus, so I'm going to add a little bit of depth of field to my camera to blur that out. So I'm gonna scroll down to my camera settings, and I'm gonna choose depth of field, turn it on. So I'm gonna hit set focus point, and I'm gonna click right on the glass to make sure that we are focusing on that part. And then it's a little too strong, so I wanna go into my f-stop and increase this value to something like 5. If you're not sure what's in focus and what's not, we have a cool little tool in the geometry view. We can click on this button to open it, bring this guy on over here. I'll just dock it on top of my materials. We zoom on in, you can see we have a couple of planes, and those planes are telling us where our focus is. So if I increase this to, say, 20, you can see the light colored planes are the extent of what's in focus, and the dark color is what's actually in focus. This is not enough for me. I want to blur this background a little more. So I want to bring the f-stop down until we're pretty defocused on there, and we're more focused on our product here. That also blurs the glass out in front, which gives us a little bit more, it kind of brings us into the scene. So I can go ahead and save this. So I guess I'll just save this at a round number of 9. And this is the interesting thing. We have this keep focus. I'm going to turn that off, and that way the camera won't follow that focus point. Now, if I go back to the beginning, the one concern I have with this is that now the glass itself is kind of blurred and out of focus. We can actually animate our depth of field. So this is like super extra credit at this point. I'm gonna go ahead and save the camera, and I'm gonna right click on it and go to animation and choose to add a depth of field animation. Here, we're going to choose where the camera's in focus in the beginning and then the end as well. So in the beginning, we wanna start by focusing on the glass. So on our depth of field animation, I'll click this crosshair to select the focal point, and we'll click right on the glass. So right now the glass is in focus, and I want to bring that starting f-stop probably higher because the object is much closer, so we have to compensate for that. So let's bring this up to 20, and that's going to make that look a little more natural. We still have some blurring in the background. And then what we want to do is at the end of this, we want to make sure it's ending where we want. And the good news is we already created this depth of field animation after we set the focal point here, the depth of field. And so by doing that, we essentially already have our finishing endpoint exactly where we want it. So just like that, we've created a pretty advanced product reveal. It's pretty cool. Simple but effective. Now, if you want to figure out what to do with the render settings, I'll walk you through that and then we will finish this tutorial. The easiest way to figure out render settings is hit the H key to bring up the heads-up display, and this is going to give us a lot of numbers. We want to hit Control, Shift, and R to bring up a region render. If I resize this and focus it on the blurriest or the noisiest part of our image here, we can see how long this has to sit until that looks nice and smooth. What we're looking for is what the sample count is when the fuzzy or noisy part is nice and smoothed out. As far as I'm concerned, it's something here for this scene, I want to say around 500. I'll probably go about 1,000 just to be sure. So I can close this out and I can confidently say that when I go to do my final rendering, I'll use 1,000 samples. So when I open my render settings, bring them on over here, we're going to go into our animation for output and we want to change our resolution. So I'm going to render this out at 4K. I've got a pretty fast computer, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. But if you don't, I'd recommend either 1080p or a little lower. Now, this is a little bug I want to call out. You see how this isn't a full, like a round number? We need to fix this, unfortunately, by going into KeyShot, go up to Image, Resolution Presets. I'm going to go to Landscape and make sure I'm in 16:9 aspect ratio. And now we can see all of our numbers here are correct. So 1920 by 1080, it used to say 1081. All these numbers were odd values. It wasn't correct. So now I've got a proper 4K resolution. And then for my actual options, I'm going to make sure I'm in maximum samples and I'll set it to 1,000 samples, which is not very high for a fast GPU. If you're on a CPU, you're going to be a lot lower than that. Then lastly, we're going to render out our animation. If you want to render out the video, just leave this at MP4. And if you would like to save all the individual frames that make up that video, you can turn on frames output and set your format. I like to use PNG because it's non-compressed. So it's a higher quality image than a JPEG. And then you just choose essentially where it's going to render. That's going to be the location here and here. So you can go ahead and copy that folder's path if you want to go back to that once it's done rendering. But at that point, I think we're pretty much good. We want to make sure we choose our work area. Otherwise, we're going to render this whole long animation. So I want to make sure that I only render up to 6 seconds. So for me, that's going to be frame 181. So here we're going to choose frame range, and I'm going to start at, I'm going to end at 181, and I need to choose where it's going to start, which is 1 second. For me, that's frame 31. So I'll type in 31, and that's going to give us a total of 151 frames for 5 seconds of animation. I'll go ahead and add that to my render queue. And a little bit later, when I'm ready to render that out, I'll go ahead and click on process queue, and that will kick off our animation. And after KeyShot's done rendering, this is what we are left with. And while it's not bad, it's a little bit flat and gray. It doesn't quite have that punch I'm looking for. And after a little bit of post-production in DaVinci Resolve, this is what it looks like. Much better, much more ready for prime time if you ask me. Now, I didn't record the process of post-production in this tutorial. Sorry about that. If this is something you'd like to see in the future though, drop a comment down below and I'll make sure I put that on my to-do list. Until next time, happy rendering.